I never thought duct tape could taste like betrayal, but here I was, gagged and tied to a chair in the back of a van, silently cursing myself for leaving the courthouse after midnight. Funny how you spend years putting criminals behind bars, and then fate decides to throw you in the trunk of one. The van lurched around a corner, tossing me against cold metal. My wrists burned from the zip ties, but my mind was burning even hotter, calculating, cataloging voices, replaying every choice that led me here. 3 men, 1 gun, and a mistake they had no idea they'd made. I wasn't just any random guy they'd snatched from the street. I was a federal prosecutor, and I remembered faces. But then my gaze landed on him. The one who sat across from me, his hood pulled low, eyes catching mine for a split second too long. Unlike the others, his stare wasn't cruel. It was conflicted. And for reasons I couldn't explain, in the middle of panic and rage, my heart tripped over itself. "Don't look at me," he muttered, voice low, almost ashamed. Too late. I already had. The night in New York was merciless. Rain hammering down as the van pulled into a warehouse district I'd driven past 1,000 times on my way to court. The men dragged me inside, boots echoing against cracked concrete floors. The air smelled of rust, gasoline, and desperation. "You got the cash, we let him go." One of them barked into his burner phone. Classic ransom play. Wrong victim. I couldn't speak, gag biting into my jaw, but every instinct in me screamed to act. My entire career was built on reading people under pressure, and I saw it in the hooded one, the hesitation, the way his hand lingered on my arm just a second longer than necessary when shoving me into the chair. It wasn't cruelty. It was care hidden beneath the weight of bad choices. Hours blurred. Interrogations, threats, the others circling like vultures. Yet between the shouts, my eyes always found him. And every time, he looked away as if it was dangerous to hold on too long. Until finally, when the others left to make another call, he crouched beside me, pulling down the gag just enough for me to breathe. "You need to stop looking at me like that," he whispered, voice breaking in a way no hardened criminals should. "Like what?" My throat was raw, but the words slipped out. "Like I'm worth saving." That was the moment the lines blurred. Between justice and mercy. Between duty and something terrifyingly close to desire. His name was Adrian. I learned it when one of the others cursed at him for hesitating with the gun. I held onto it like oxygen. Adrian. A name that didn't belong in this crumbling warehouse. A name that sounded like it belonged whispered in the quiet of a safe place, not shouted in a den of criminals. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent my career dismantling men like this, exposing their crimes, tearing apart their networks. Yet here I was, tethered to one by something I couldn't explain. Maybe it was the way his hand shook when he untied me to let me drink water. Maybe it was the way he looked away when I caught him staring at me like he wanted to be anywhere but here. But the truth was sharper than any attraction. I needed him. If I was getting out alive, it would be through the one man in this room who still had a conscience. "You don't belong here," I told him later, my voice barely audible over the hum of the generator. He flinched. "You don't know me. I know enough. You're not like them." He gave a bitter laugh. "You think that makes a difference?" "It makes all the difference," I said. And for a second, I almost forgot I was the one tied up. That night, something shifted. It wasn't a sudden declaration, or some reckless brush of lips. It was in the silence between us, the unspoken question. How do 2 men on opposite sides of justice find themselves drawn together in a place where neither should trust the other? And beneath it all, the truth lingered like a blade at my throat. If they ever discovered who I really was, this fragile thread between us would snap. Not just for me, for him too, because saving me might destroy him. The others came back drunk with victory, convinced the ransom would be paid. They didn't see the way Adrian's hands shook when he tightened the rope around my wrists again. They didn't notice how close his fingers brushed against my pulse, lingering like he needed proof I was still alive. But I did. I noticed everything. They argued over the money, voices bouncing off the corrugated walls, and I filed each word away like evidence. Yet through the chaos, all I could think about was him, the way he wouldn't meet my eyes now, like he was afraid of what he'd already let me see. Hours stretched into days. Time in captivity is different. It becomes measured not by clocks but by sounds. The drip of a leaking pipe, the shuffle of boots, the metallic clink of guns being cleaned. And then there was Adrian's quiet breathing when he kept watch near me, a rhythm steadier than any clock I'd ever owned. "Why are you here?" I asked one night when the others had passed out, bottles scattered around like broken promises. He didn't answer at first. His hood was down for once, his dark hair messy, his jaw set hard. But then he sighed, like the truth was heavy. "Because sometimes you make one mistake," he whispered, "and it follows you until you forget who you were before it." I wanted to reach out, even bound as I was. I wanted to tell him I understood. Maybe not his exact pain, but the weight of choices, the way the past claws at you no matter how many times you try to shut the door on it. Instead, I said, "Then why did you give me water? Why do you keep pulling the gag down when they're not looking? Why not just let me break?" His eyes flickered to mine, and for the first time I saw a war inside him. "Because you remind me I'm not completely gone." The next morning, the crew's leader Mason, the kind of man who thought cruelty made him powerful, decided to make an example out of me. He pressed a knife to my throat, smiling at Adrian like it was some kind of sick game. "Think he's still worth all this trouble?" Mason sneered. Adrian didn't flinch, but I saw his jaw tighten. He kept his voice even. "The client wants him alive. Dead, he's worth nothing. Alive, he's a liability," Mason shot back. The knife's edge bit into my skin, a thin line of fire. I stayed still, heart pounding, but my eyes never left Adrian's, and his never left mine. For a moment I thought he might let me die, but then his hand was on Mason's arm, steady, firm. "Don't be stupid. You kill him now, and this whole thing blows up in our faces." "It worked," Mason grumbled, shoved me back into the chair, and stalked off to light another cigarette. But Adrian stayed, his eyes tracing the cut on my neck, his breathing uneven. Slowly, carefully, when no one was watching, he pressed a rag to the wound. His fingers brushed my skin, and in that instant, the danger of the blade felt less terrifying than the danger of how much I wanted him to keep touching me. "You shouldn't have stopped him," I murmured. He glanced at me sharply. "You want to die?" "No," I said. "I want to know why you care if I do." He didn't answer, but he didn't move his hand away either. By the fourth night, the line between captor and prisoner blurred so much it was almost unrecognizable. He started sitting closer, his shoulder brushing mine when he pretended to adjust the ropes. He slipped me scraps of food when the others weren't watching. Once, when Mason got drunk enough to swing at me, Adrian stepped between us, taking the hit himself. And every time he did, something inside me shifted. I knew the stakes. If they found out who I was, a federal prosecutor who had built cases against men just like them, they'd kill me before sunrise. And if they ever suspected what was passing, silently, invisibly, between Adrian and me, he wouldn't be spared either. But in the quiet moments, I forgot the danger. I remembered only the way his voice softened when he said my name for the first time. "Ethan," he whispered, testing it out like a secret. It sounded different from his lipsless, like an identity, more like a promise. I should have shut it down. I should have reminded myself he was a criminal, that he had a choice to be here, that whatever tenderness he showed me didn't erase the fact that he was still part of this. But when his hand lingered a second too long on my arm, when our eyes met in the silence, when the air between us felt charged with something neither of us could name, I didn't push him away. It happened on the fifth night. The others were gone, out trying to confirm the ransom drop. The warehouse was quiet, just the two of us. Adrian cut my gag loose, letting me drink from the same bottle he used, and when I handed it back, our fingers touched. Neither of us moved. For a long moment, the world held its breath. Then he leaned closer, his forehead almost against mine. "I can't keep doing this," he said, voice trembling. "Then don't," I whispered back. It wasn't a kiss, not really. Just a brush of lips, hesitant and broken. But it felt like the first real thing in days, maybe years. When he pulled back, his eyes were wide, terrified. "If they find out," They won't, I said. We'll make sure they don't. But even as I said it, I knew the truth. Nothing stayed hidden forever. That night I didn't sleep. I lay awake, ropes biting into my skin, but my thoughts tangled with his. What if this was madness? What if this was survival instinct dressed up as attraction? What if it was both? And then came the real question, the one that haunted me. What happens when I get free? Because freedom meant justice. Justice meant trials. And trials meant men like Adrian went to prison, no matter how soft their touch had been in the dark. The thought should have made me recoil. Instead, it made me ache. And I realized, with something close to dread, that the most dangerous part of this whole ordeal wasn't the knife at my throat or the gun at my back. It was the fact that I didn't want to imagine a world where Adrian wasn't standing in it. The sixth night was when everything began to unravel. The ransom deadline loomed. The crew had grown restless, edgy, their arguments sharper, their paranoia spreading like wildfire. I could feel it in the air. The storm was coming. And storms never spared anyone. Mason paced in front of me, muttering about clients, double crosses, and whether I was worth the bullet. His knife tapped against his thigh like a metronome for violence. The others were silent, shadows with guns. But Adrian stood near the edge of the room, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed anywhere but on me. When Mason shoved the knife under my chin again, I didn't look at him. I looked at Adrian, and that was my mistake. You see this? Mason snarled, his voice rising. He keeps staring at you like you're his goddamn savior. The room went quiet. Adrian froze, his mask slipping for just a second, just enough. Mason saw it. So did the others. Jesus Christ. One of them muttered. You getting soft on him? Adrian's voice was steady, but I heard the crack underneath. I'm keeping him alive, like you ordered. Nothing more. Mason grinned, wolfish. Nothing more, huh? Then you won't mind proving it. The knife left my throat and landed in Adrian's hand. Mason leaned back, arms crossed, daring him. Do it. Cut him. Show me you're not about to turn into a liability. Adrian's hand trembled around the blade. His eyes flicked to me, then away, then back. For one terrifying moment, I thought he might actually do it, just a shallow cut, enough to prove loyalty. My heart pounded, not from fear of pain, but from the knowledge of what it would do to him. I shook my head, just slightly. Don't. He exhaled shakily, then dropped the knife, clattered against the floor. No, Adrian said. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a gunshot. Mason's smile vanished. You just signed your death warrant, Mason hissed. And just like that, the fragile balance shattered. That night, I expected them to kill him. I expected to wake to the sound of fists, the crack of bones, maybe worse. But when the others passed out, fueled by whiskey and anger, Adrian was still standing, bruised but alive. He came to me in the shadows, his face tight with pain. His lip was split, blood smeared across his cheek. He knelt in front of me, cutting the ropes loose with shaking hands. You need to go, he whispered. Now, before they change their minds. I stared at him, disbelief surging. If I go, they'll kill you. They'll kill me anyway. He avoided my eyes. At least this way you have a chance. Something in me snapped then. I couldn't be the prosecutor calculating outcomes, couldn't be the hostage waiting for rescue. I was just a man, staring at another man who was breaking himself to save me. Come with me, I said. His head jerked up, eyes wide. What? Run with me. You don't belong here. You said it yourself. For a moment, hope flickered across his face, wild, dangerous hope. But then it died, smothered by the weight of everything trapping him. You don't understand, he said hoarsely. I owe them. I owe Mason. If I disappear, it's not just me they'll come after. It's my family. The word landed heavy between us. Family. A chain heavier than any rope. Still, I couldn't stop myself. If you stay, you're dead. If you leave with me, at least we fight for something. His jaw clenched. He looked like he wanted to believe me. He looked like he wanted to take my hand and never look back. But all he said was, You need to survive. That's all that matters. And then he leaned forward, pressing his forehead against mine, just for a heartbeat. Just long enough for me to feel the truth he couldn't say aloud. When he pulled back, his hands were shaking as he retied the ropes loose this time, so I could break free when the moment came. You'll know when, he whispered. The moment came sooner than either of us expected. The next day, Mason got word that the ransom wasn't coming. Their client had gone dark, the deal collapsing. Panic spread. And panic in men like that only ever ended one way. Pack it up, Mason ordered. We're moving him. New location. New plan. They dragged me toward the van again, my body limp, my mind racing. Adrian was at my side, his grip firm but careful, guiding me more than forcing me. Our eyes met just once, and I saw it there. This was it. The warehouse door creaked open. The storm outside had finally broken. Rain pouring down in sheets. Thunder shook the air. And then sirens. Distant at first, then closer. Flashing red and blue in the distance. Cops! One of them shouted. Chaos erupted. Guns drawn. Curses flying. Mason screaming orders no one followed. In the blur of it, Adrian shoved me hard, toward the back exit. Go! He shouted. I stumbled into the rain, ropes slipping free from my wrists. My heart thundered louder than the storm. Behind me I heard Mason shouting, the crack of gunfire. I didn't run. Not yet. I turned back because he was still inside. Through the doorway I saw him, Adrian, standing between Mason and the chaos, gun in his hand, not pointed at me, not at the cops. At Mason. For a split second, everything froze. Then Mason lunged. Adrian fired. The world shattered into sound shouts, sirens, rain. The echo of a gunshot that would never leave my memory. When the police swarmed the warehouse, they pulled me out, shouting questions I didn't answer. They called me sir, recognized my name, realized too late who I was. But all I cared about was the figure being dragged out in cuffs. Rain washing the blood from his face. Adrian. Our eyes locked across the chaos. He didn't fight, didn't resist. But in that brief, impossible moment, he looked at me the way he had in the dark of the warehouse. Like I was the only thing keeping him tethered. I wanted to run to him. I wanted to scream that he wasn't like them, that he had saved me, that he deserved more than prison bars. But the words stuck in my throat, drowned by the weight of who I was. Federal prosecutor, victim, witness, and he was the criminal who had crossed a line no one would forgive. The storm swallowed us both as they took him away. The trial would come. The truth would surface. My testimony would matter more than anything. But as I stood there, soaked in rain and shaking from everything I had survived, one thought burned hotter than the rest. This wasn't over. Not for me. Not for him. Because you can put a man in chains, you can drag him into court, you can bury him under the weight of his mistakes. But you can't erase what happened in the shadows, in the silence, in the fragile, forbidden touch of one man saving another when no one else would. And I knew I would burn my career to the ground before I let Adrian's story end here. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and coffee gone stale. For everyone else, this was just another trial. For me, it was a war between who I was supposed to be and who I had become. The headlines screamed the story long before the jury was selected. Federal prosecutor held hostage by criminal ring. Reporters lined the steps like vultures, shoving microphones at me, asking if I would seek maximum sentencing. They didn't know the truth. They didn't know that the man in chains was the reason I was still alive. Adrian sat at the defense table, wrists cuffed, his posture guarded but his eyes steady. He hadn't looked at me once since the trial began. Couldn't blame him. What could he expect from me, the man who could either save him or bury him with a single sentence? The prosecutor assigned to the case wasn't me. That would have been an ethical nightmare. But I was the star witness, and every word I spoke mattered more than anyone else's. The first days were brutal. Mason's crimes laid bare. The ransom scheme, the kidnapping, the gunfire. The jury flinched at the photographs, the recordings. Every detail painted the picture of monsters. And Adrian was one of them, at least on paper. But paper didn't capture the nights he kept me alive. Paper didn't show the bruise he'd taken in my place, the rope he'd tied loose so I could slip free, the way his hands shook when he touched me like I was something worth saving. I sat on the stand, under oath, the weight of the courtroom pressing down on me. And then the defense attorney asked the question everyone had been waiting for. Mr. Carter, during your captivity, did the defendant, Adrian Reyes, ever harm you? The truth was a blade I'd been balancing on for weeks. I could tip it either way. I took a breath. No, he saved me. The room erupted. The defense attorney's face lit with hope. The prosecution scowled. The judge banged the gavel for silence. But none of it mattered. All that mattered was the flicker in Adrian's eyes, the first time he looked at me since the night of the storm. It was there for only a second, but it was enough. The trial dragged on. Mason's guilt was undeniable. The evidence stacked like bricks of a prison wall. He wouldn't see daylight again. The others, too, fell under the hammer of justice. But Adrian was different. The prosecution argued he was complicit, that he had every chance to walk away, that he had chosen crime over conscience. The defense countered with my testimony, with his lack of prior record, with the fact that when the final moment came, he'd turned his gun not on me, but on Mason. The jury wrestled with it. So did I, because here was the truth I couldn't say aloud. In that warehouse, in the silence and the storm, Adrian had become more than my captor. He had become the crack in the armor I'd worn my entire life. The proof that even in the darkest places, love could find you and change everything. But love wasn't a legal argument. On the last day of the trial, I found myself standing outside the courthouse, the city buzzing around me. Reporters shouted my name, asking if I thought Adrian Reyes deserved prison. My throat tightened. My answer was simple, but it carried everything I couldn't put in the record. No, I said. He deserves a chance. The verdict came down 2 days later. Mason, guilty on all counts, life without parole. The others, guilty, decades behind bars. Adrian, guilty but with a reduced sentence 5 years with the possibility of parole in 3. The judge's gavel fell like a final heartbeat. Adrian didn't move, didn't react. But when they let him out, his eyes found mine again, and for the first time since that night, I saw its smallest, most fragile smile. And it nearly broke me. 3 years is a lifetime when you're waiting. I buried myself in work, case after case, but none of it filled the hollow space he'd left behind. I visited once early on, but it only made things harder for both of us. He told me not to come again until he was free. I don't want you to see me like this, he'd said, and I'd respected it. But every night I thought of him. The rain. The kiss that wasn't really a kiss. The promise we never spoke aloud. When the call finally came that he was granted parole, I drove to the prison myself. I told myself it was professional courtesy, that I just wanted closure. But my heart knew better. The gates clanged open. Adrian walked out, thinner, older, but still him. Still the man who had pressed his forehead to mine in the dark and told me I reminded him he wasn't completely gone. For a long moment we just stared at each other. No ropes, no guards, no storm. Just us. Ethan, he said finally, his voice rough with disbelief. Adrian. My throat ached with his name. And then I was moving, and so was he. And when our arms wrapped around each other, it was like every wound, every scar, every sleepless night was worth it. You came, he whispered against my shoulder. I never left, I answered. This time, when his lips touched mine, it wasn't broken or hesitant. It was real. It was freedom. It was everything we had fought for without even knowing we were fighting for it. We didn't have a roadmap. We didn't know how to explain to the world how a prosecutor and his former captor could build something out of the wreckage. But we didn't need to, because sometimes love doesn't come wrapped in perfection. Sometimes it comes in chains and rain and impossible choices. And sometimes, against every odd, it survives. Years later, when people asked how we met, we'd laugh and shake our heads. We'd say it was a long story, too long for anyone but us to understand. But in the quiet of our own home, when the past felt like a ghost at the window, Adrian would look at me with that same fragile smile, and I'd know the truth. We hadn't just survived. We'd found each other, and that was more than enough. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.